what I love so much about this device is that you get that immediate feedback, because I was going into it somewhat blind. I knew, okay, it was hydrogen and methane, so I have to stop all these foods. Mm-hmm. But for a device like this, you can actually test and try a certain food out for a week during, one of the weeks that you're trying different stuff and see, well, do my numbers go up or does it stay steady? And so you're able to maybe not necessarily pull back and restrict.
That's kind of almost why it's useful to be able to measure these things. Because if you can't measure, how do you know if you're making progress? Because, your symptoms, you might be making great progress and your levels are going down over time, but your symptoms may still be there, right? So you're still feeling bad. So you kind of need to sustain what's working, or if it's not working and you're not seeing the levels go down, shift course and pick a different approach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Wellness for Life. I'm your host, Niki Wolf, and today we are bringing you another episode in the gut health world. And this one, we're going to be talking about Gadget, and specifically FoodMarble. We have the CEO and founder, Aonghus Shortt, today with us. He is an engineering background PhD, developed the first prototype breath analyzer to help his now wife with her GI symptoms. He's dedicated his life to unpacking some of the most common and complex yet undeserved digestive conditions. He's an advocate for accessible and affordable digital health tech. Thank you so much for being here, Aonghus.
Great to be on the show, Niki.
Absolutely. We're excited to explore not only this conversation, but the ins, the whats, the hows on this device. But before we dive into that, I know a little bit of the background of why you've created the product, but I'd love to hear from your perspective, what initiated this spark to create a device like this?
Yeah, so it goes back really to when like you say, my now wife, Grace, she was really suffering with her digestion. So she'd been through quite a journey trying to find out what the problem was, and she went to different types of doctors, and she did quite a few diagnostic tests, and people who've got gut health issues, they're getting colonoscopies, endoscopies, all of these imaging tests, all the blood tests, stool tests. She did the whole kind of gamut of testing, and they didn't find anything in particular. She got a diagnosis of IBS, which can, in many ways, it's not great for people because, it doesn't actually necessarily point to what you can do next. And so, yeah, and actually the kind of the spark really was, she'd been on a couple of medications, but this particular medication that was suggested for her, it just had the completely opposite effect. So it's one of these medications that it kind of acts so much that acts on the gut, also acts on the brain and vice versa. So you've got these low dose antidepressant treatments that are done sometimes for people with gut health issues. But yeah, so in her case, it just made her feel worse. And she was just in, she was just in a mist and she just felt really off. And, so I said, okay, is there something I can do? I was just coming out of, I was doing, a PhD in electrical engineering. I was coming out of that and I was doing the job, but I still had access to the research literature. So I went to see, okay, well, what's on the horizon? What's happening now that could help? And I came across the low FODMAP diet was just coming out, and I could see that those guys were using breath analysis as part of the research. And I said, wow, okay, so there's something you can do to measure, how foods have been digested in the gut, because FODMAPs is all about, they're highly fermentable foods. And the idea behind the diet is if you can limit how much of those you're eating, that can reduce the amount of fermentation and the amount of gas. And because the gas it builds up and it provokes symptoms. So I was okay, so there's this approach that works really well, because you're seeing 3 in 4 people or something were improving quite a bit on the low FODMAP diet, which is just was unprecedented at the time, right? And I could see breath testing was being used to see like to see how people were, how they were processing the FODMAP. So that kind of got me going. And I applied some of my engineering know-how to be able to make a prototype, which I used with Grace. And, it was pretty basic and hard to use at the time, but like she was able to see some of these trends where when she ate something that was problematic, you're seeing big increases in the molecules that we're measuring. And that linked up with how she felt later on, for the most part. So that was a really interesting, but then also the opposite was true. So like she'd have a food that she was like, I remember, we tested with mushrooms and milk and beans and bread. And it was interesting where like, I think it was with mushrooms where, when we tested it, she was like, no, I can't eat mushrooms. It's going to be a big problem. And then when we did the testing, you're seeing the fermentation was actually staying pretty low. And it's interesting when you have a number that kind of gives you the confidence to maybe kind of, if the number is saying, okay, there's not a lot of fermentation happening here, it kind of gives you the confidence to open up your diet a little bit and fry that food. So there's some of those things that really helped her. And that was where it started. Like, so we had this prototype that seemed to work well, and kind of took it from there.
Yeah, I think it's such a beautiful thing that you were able to use your background, your education to be able to develop something to be able to help your wife and now probably millions of other individuals. And to your point, it's, yes, the low FODMAP. And I think I did that for 4 months with this whole other protocol. And you have to be so restrictive at what you eat. And mushrooms are one of those categories that it's like, absolutely no. But to be able to have a device like this and be like, well, what does my body need, want? How does it react? So that is so fascinating to know that, her body didn't really respond negatively to the mushrooms, but maybe she reacted much higher to pears or apples or something like that. So again, it comes back to personalized wellness and the ability to do this from your home, which I think is so cool, and what we'll explore, a little bit deeper into this device and what it's actually measuring. And I know, you briefly mentioned, I think SIBO, but what other health or digestive conditions is FoodMarble checking for?
Yeah. So, like it's really useful where because we're measuring what's happening in the gut. So where you're because the fermentation that we're measuring, that's occurring when the food you eat isn't fully digested. So then if you don't digest it, your microbes will. So the bacteria and all the different life forms, they live off undigested food. So we're measuring where you haven't digested it properly, but then, it gets down to the microbes and they start to break it down and that produces the gases. So it's kind of a way to see where digestion is not occurring fully for what you've eaten recently. And so that's a huge problem in IBS. So people with irritable bowel syndrome, I think I saw a stat recently, 84% of people with IBS, they believe that their symptoms are related to food, and that chimes at what we see as well, where people can make changes in their diet, they can feel much better. So IBS is a big one. And SIBO, it's funny, SIBO is literally where you've got a buildup of these microbes, specifically bacteria in the small intestine. So SIBO is a really common thing, but it's also there's a huge overlap between SIBO and IBS, and SIBO overlaps with a ton of other conditions as well.
Well, one thing that I'm reading, just the more and more research on IBS and how it's just kind of this catch-all that doctors throw people into if they can't really determine what's going on. They just say, oh, you have IBS. So it can be really a frustrating diagnosis to hear because there could be a deeper, more underlying, health condition. But at the end of the day, if you are getting the IBS kind of on the radar, that there's some deeper discomfort going on. And so a device like this can really help. So not just check bacterial, but from my understanding, it also checks the methane, correct? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So methane's so we're measuring hydrogen and methane. So hydrogen's coming from the bacteria and like it's very linked to the foods that you eat, right? So if you're not digesting the foods well, you'll tend to see a big increase in hydrogen over the day, right? But then methane is an interesting one, and it's sort of like people's methane levels tend not to change as much, right? But for some people, they've got lots of methane. And in some people, it's much, much lower. So there's a whole range of methane, but it really relates to how quickly or slowly you digest food. So it's like there's a whole kind of complex dynamic happening in terms of why the methane producing bugs go up or down. But like fundamentally, they're able to, like they'll produce the methane, but methane can act as a neurotransmitter whereby it sort of signals to the gut to slow down. So it means that like food starts to move more slowly through your gut. And like the really unfortunate thing is when food moves slowly through your gut, it's the perfect conditions for more of the methane to be produced, because it just means that the methanogens that produce the methane have more time to multiply. And so you get a bit of a vicious cycle sometimes where people can end up with a lot of methane on their breath, and like, sometimes they can be very constipated. And there's like SIBO, like I guess its sister condition is EMO, and so that's where you've got so that's IMO, but that's where you've got like excessive amount of methane producing bugs in your gut. And so so we measure methane as well, and it does, where you've got an excessive amount of methane, it can be problematic for a lot of reasons. And so it's the sort of thing where if you can measure it and there's a number of things you can do to try and bring down those levels. It tends to take a bit longer to be able to bring down your methane levels. So, but that's kind of almost why it's useful to be able to measure these things. Like, because if you can't measure, like, how do you know if you're making progress? Because, your symptoms, you might be making great progress and your levels are going down over time, but your symptoms may still be there, right? So you're still feeling bad. So you kind of need to sustain like what's working, or if it's not working and you're not seeing the levels go down, shift course and pick a different approach.
Yeah. You've mentioned a few different indicators of the difference between the methane overgrowth and the hydrogen overgrowth. And, the methane, things move a little bit slower. So it's probably common to see constipation. I'm curious if there's other obvious external symptoms that if you had to generalize and say, okay, I think you might be higher in hydrogen or methane or even both, what would be some of those common generalized symptoms?
Yeah. Dude, in one way, I hate to generalize because like everyone's got their own specific situation, but it's interesting to see like some of the kind of trends you see at the high level. Like when we're looking over thousands of people, we'll see trends like, as you age, your methane levels go up, right? Like children and teenagers, their methane levels tend to be much lower. And like, as you get up to like more elderly age groups, their methane levels are much higher. And it's funny, it like increases almost in a straight line from birth to death, right? So it's methane, it does increase with age. Now you can be young and have a lot of methane, but like just in general, that's kind of the way it works. You see, like we mentioned constipation. So people, the slower your digestion, the more likely it is you've got a lot of methane going on there. So that's another one. An interesting one is like, so like when you think of body weight and stuff like that, people who were like say if we think in terms of BMI, so like that's a very kind of gross, so, if it's sort of a rough kind of guideline to kind of like if people are overweight or underweight, but people with the highest BMI, so in the higher kind of, say overweight or obese, they actually produce lower amounts of methane, but they actually produce the most hydrogen. So when it comes to body weight, it's actually the people in the most underweight category that produce the most methane and the least hydrogen. So it's a really
interesting. Yeah. I'd be curious to see, I'm blanking on the the more accurate measurement be outside of the BMI? Because like muscle mass and considering those factors, I'd be curious to see if there's any studies on that versus methane and hydrogen.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is like this data is just emerging. Like the aspect in relation to BMI, that was a collaboration we did with a researcher at Mass General in Boston, where we gathered the data and we analyzed it together, and that's what we came up with. But like we need like more of this research and studies to see, okay, like what is actually the driving factor? Because there could be so many reasons why. Like for people who are in higher BMI categories where it is kind of like way more hydrogen and like the underweight category is very interesting as well, because when it comes to SIBO, like a lot of people, it's interesting, you're more likely to have SIBO if you're you're very overweight, but then also if you're very underweight. So there's kind of like, you kind of at the extremes, you'll tend to get like some of these problems, right?
Yeah. Were you able to see a correlation, male or female, if one was more predominant?
Yeah, it's interesting. So like with a lot of digestive issues, they skew a little bit more towards females. So like, traditionally people will talk about IBS being 2/3 women, 1/3 men. But an interesting thing when you think of age, so like you see a big difference in terms of age. So things for both men and women, but especially women, they tend to be at their worst in that sort of category of about 40 to 50 years old. So, and like it's thought to, like in women, it's thought to link to menopause. So kind of that perimenopausal, that sort of period. Like like we see these, you see the big change, like you see kind of a lot of dynamics happening around then, and there needs to be more research done there, but like, there's certainly like, there's a lot of changes in the body, and you're seeing that being reflected in the gut and like some of the things we're measuring as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have a menopause supplement formula, and we put an ingredient called turkey rhubarb in there. And that helps with motility and bowel movements, because that's such a correlation that women in their menopausal year tend to struggle with constipation. So that makes perfect sense.
Yes. And we see that as well, like where constipation is more of an issue for women. And, I think sometimes people with any GI issue, they can get a bit hopeless because maybe they've been dealing with it for quite a few years. And so I guess, our message would always be there is there's different ways of approaching these things. And like sometimes people go to their doctor and they won't necessarily find a solution, but there's always other ways to look at it.
Absolutely. Well, I'd love to have you walk us through the device itself, and how do we go about this? Is it something that we do first thing in the morning? Do we do it with each meal? For somebody who knows nothing about the product and, they were able to order it, which by the way, if you're listening, we're going to have a discount code that we'll mention at the end. But if you bring this into your home, you're struggling with digestive issues and you want to test what it is, because the more you know about your body, the better approach you can to heal yourself. And so let's walk through what the device looks like and where it all begins. Yeah.
So I'll just show you, this is what the device looks like. So it's pretty small. So, and there's kind of like a mouthpiece at the front here, and you're breathing into here, and actually there's like basically a canal here where you breathe in here, and there's like a bunch of sensors along the way. So we've got a sensor array that it's measuring different gases, but then also the environmental conditions and lots of different other measurements, because, we need to, of course, kind of really understand what's in your breath. So there's a lot going on there, but, fundamentally you breathe in here. We're measuring the gas levels, and what's involved is essentially, like the app will bring you through this, but you're going to pause your breathing for a few seconds, and then you're going to exhale into the device for 5 seconds. And while you're doing that, you hold down the button, which kind of just lets the app know what you're doing. But essentially, you're breathing in for that period of time, and we're going to be taking measurements the whole way through. But so it's only like after like a total of 8 seconds, you've done the whole thing, right? So that will take a breath reading, and so we're measuring hydrogen and methane on the breath. that's going to go directly into your data. So you don't have to do anything else. You don't have to plug in or anything like that. And what we say to people that like probably the most useful way to use it is where, most people, they'll go through, we've got this thing called a discovery program, which kind of brings them through, a series of steps that really understand how they're digesting food. So the first week, you're just measuring what's normal for you. So, what we say now to people is take something like 3 breath readings a day. So, the main thing is to be consistent in when to take them. So you could take a reading first thing, in the middle of the day, and the end of the day. And that would be perfect. And just, try and be consistent as possible as to when you take them. And so you'll do that for a week. You'll record what you eat. And you can record things like how you slept, your stress levels. You can record your symptoms. And like for a lot of people as well, they record like how they're doing from a kind of stool perspective. So they could be recording like, when they go to the toilet as well. So they're recording that data on like just what their normal life is. But then like for the second week of the process, we're going to help you essentially to make changes to your diet to reduce the amount of some of these fermentable foods that you're eating. So like these would be the FODMAPs, but we'll help you kind of bring those levels down. And what you'll typically see then is that, the fermentation levels that you're measuring will start to come down, especially hydrogen. And, that helps kind of reset your gut. And we actually call it the reset stage, but if you've got all these digestive symptoms, it's very hard to kind of test in a kind of a robust way if you're like feeling really unwell. So that week of limiting your FODMAP intake just kind of helps things get a little bit under control, help the kind of inflammation come down a bit. And then after that stage, that's when you're doing basically very specific tests on different types of food. So we'll take stuff like lactose, fructose, sorbitol, inulin. These are like really common, FODMAPs that are in the diet. And so we just selected the 4 probably most relevant ones. And, each test that you do, each one of those that you do, we then customize what we're showing to you. So we've got a foods library where we can show like which foods are kind of, potentially problematic for you. So we have a traffic light system and we give you all the info on which foods maybe to limit, which foods are totally okay. And then you can go and you can search for foods as well as branded foods, by the way. So we've got like, for a lot of kind of supermarkets around the world, we've got data on like, what foods maybe are good or bad for you. But yeah, so we're kind of building up that sort of personalized kind of information bank for you. There's also recipes in there as well. So if you're if you're going through that reset stage, for example, that can be really useful where you can go in and you can pick out some low FODMAP recipes. And then once you've actually finished the program, the recipes will be, the indicator to say how compatible it is to you. That will be personalized to you then. So you can go in and see, okay, for me, what would be a good recipe to pick? And that's something we're expanding a lot as well. So we want to just kind of give people as much, useful data that they can use in the future. So like, if you're in the supermarket or if you're in a restaurant, you can pull out the app and just search for a particular food and see, okay, is that going to be a problem for me?
Yeah. You know what I love about this so much? So I think I've shared with you, and I know I've shared with our listeners, I had been on a digestive journey about 5 or 6 years ago. I found out I have SIBO, H. pylori, C. diff, blastocitis hominis, candida, Lyme disease, all these kind of fun things. And in order to do testing, I worked with my naturopathic doctor, which not everybody, has access to. So you got to already go through some hoops for that. And the testing, the breath testing was kind of this extensive, and again, it was like 5-6 years ago. And I was in a lot of discomforts. I don't remember the nitty gritty, but I know it was hours of testing. You had to test at certain increments, and then you had to dive into this And it's a little bit different depending on what your doctor recommends. But I did a low FODMAP diet for 4 months. And I think with our new research, understanding how important diversity is and how restriction, even though that might be good seasonally or intermittent, it could actually create more long-term damage. What I love so much about this device is that you get that immediate feedback, because I was going into it somewhat blind. I knew, okay, it was hydrogen and methane. So I have to stop all these foods. Mm-hmm. But for a device like this, you can actually test and try a certain food out for a week during, one of the weeks that you're trying different stuff and see, well, do my numbers go up or does it stay steady? And so you're able to maybe not necessarily pull back and restrict so many different foods. I think it's going to be a journey and there's going to be a lot of restriction when you're trying to heal something like this. But I think it's so important for this personalized approach because even though low FODMAP diet does help a lot of individuals, that's not something to sustain for a long period of time. And so to be able to get this immediate feedback, and it sounds like the testing for this is so much easier than I just remember it was like a full day of like these very extensive breath testing, all these different routines. And it just seems like so much more simple, and with more personalized information.
Yeah, well, so we really try and kind of emphasize that, it doesn't help anyone to cut out a really large part of your diet for a really long time. It's not going to be fun, and it's not going to that. Just your gut needs the diversity in your foods, and these fermentable foods, they're not inherently wrong, but it's kind of seeing which ones can you kind of handle and which ones maybe are a problem for you now. And the cool thing is, if you can start to get your symptoms under control and start to gradually reintroduce different types of FODMAPs, you can actually cope with much more of them over time. It's a bit of a process because you need to kind of build it up over time. But the goal is to have as broad a diet as possible and to have these fermentable foods. But you're anyone with IBS or SIBO, sometimes people will say, just take a fiber supplement. But, for some people, if they take that fiber supplement, they'll feel worse. And, it's just not credible at all that they could keep doing that. So it's kind of about getting to a better place from a symptom perspective and then seeing, okay, can I introduce some of these, FODMAPs or higher fiber foods into my diet and kind of build up that diversity over time.
You know what it reminds me of too? My husband's in the therapy world, and it reminds me of how do I build the tools, the resiliency. So how do we build a resilient gut? How do we build a resilient mind so that we're not triggered so easily? So yes. How do we build our coping skills so that we're not affected by external factors? And I think about almost that in the same way of the gut. And it's funny that there's such a deep connection. How do we build such a resilient gut that we're not so sensitive to if there's a little bit, and obviously my mom's celiac, so I understand that there's a time and a place in certain individuals where it's just not on the table. You can't play around with, just adding different things back in.
And gluten, sure.
Yeah. Yes. But how can we go in towards a direction of how do we build a resilient gut that we don't have to keep pulling stuff out, but we can slowly integrate them back in? At least that's my goal.
Yeah. And I think part of what can help there is where things are done incrementally. So you're sort of when we're asking people to restrict their FODMAPs, we're not asking people to restrict them to zero. We're okay, we'll do a reduction. Let's see what you're able to manage. And then they'll see their fermentation levels will go down, right? So, and they'll see their symptoms go down. And it's something that people can take a bit of time with as well. They don't have to do it in a week. But typically with a low FODMAP diet, it tends to be like you say, Niki, it tends to be a much longer period of time, and it tends to be a fuller restriction. And you really can get a situation. I know with Grace, for example, we see it with our users all the time where if you eliminate FODMAPs completely for an extended period of time, your symptoms will usually go away, right? But you'll also over time you'll get more and more sensitive. So it's actually can be somewhat counterproductive if you don't kind of start to reintroduce. And I think that's where you can build that resiliency, because once you start to get kind of, you start to build up the diversity in what you eat over time, you notice that actually, you're seeing these signals where actually this isn't a problem for me anymore. And so, but like kind of just having a sense of cause and effect and seeing kind of a sense of control, because symptoms are so unpredictable otherwise. I mean, and like there's different reasons that could be causing the symptoms. And so if you see, okay, my fermentations levels are low, but I'm feeling, stomach cramps or abdominal pain, maybe that relates to something else in this case. So at least you can say, okay, it's just something else, and it'll pass, and we can, but yeah, being able to quantify at least gives people a sense of, okay, what's actually driving things here.
Absolutely. I think that's why I like holistic health so much, because we're looking at all the components of, am I getting these symptoms not because of my diet has changed, but because I'm not sleeping at all, or my stress levels, and all of that is so integrated. So a few questions came to mind when I think of the device, and one immediate, let's say somebody purchases this. Can I breath test? Does it last a day? Is it a week? Is it a month? What does that look like in terms of how long I can be testing for?
Yeah. So you can use the device, like almost always for people, like the amount of time they'll be using the device is way less than the length of time it will last for. So like, unless you're doing a lot of breath testing, you shouldn't have any problem with the life of the device. So like, it tends to last for a year or more for people. And, with the intensive testing, or, even just kind of taking a few breath readings a day, you're not going to do that for a really long time generally. So the device is fully reusable, and it can be used for, like, you can do the traditional breath test as well, like kind of like what you're describing, Niki, where, it might be 2 hours for a SIBO test, or 3 hours for like, where you're looking at food intolerances. Like, you can do them as well. And like, we help people do that in the app, where you're consuming something like fructose, for example, and you're taking like breath readings while it's going through your gut. But yeah, so fully reusable, and it's sort of like the device, we've a guarantee in the device as well. So if you have a problem, just let us know. So like it can really become your companion in a way to kind of use over time, and just see kind of like whether it be IBS or you're kind of monitoring your SIBO, like as a way to kind of see, okay, well, how are things changing, and where do I need to make a change?
That is absolutely incredible for me to hear. I kind of assumed it was just something like a temporary, like blood work. You collect the data, you send it off, and you get this information. But this sounds like it's a tool, like an Oura Ring and an Apple Watch, that you can be continuously collecting this data. And to your point, maybe in the beginning, whether you geek out or whether you need to be testing often. I mean, I know for me, trying something out, I want to collect all the data as much as I can. Well, that'll kind of like fizzle off the amount that you do it. But to know that this purchase is for, a lifetime use, to be able to continue testing and see how things, I think that's pretty fascinating. And again, I don't think there's anything else on the market quite like that.
No. So we're the first and only device of its kind. So, yeah.
Amazing. Now, I believe you mentioned this kind of an app. So is that correct, that there's a FoodMarble app?
Yeah, exactly. So there's an app, and that's kind of where you're able to record things. So like, you'll be using it if you're taking breath readings. You'll be using it if, you can record your symptoms, like any of those sort of metrics we were talking about. Like if you want to record your sleep last night, or you want to kind of record how your stress levels are, you can do that in the app. And the app is kind of part of it as well, as trying to fill in the gaps as well, in terms of, sharing some insights in terms of how the gut works, and like how to interpret this information as well, because it's so different for everyone. So we try and make it so that it can be as individualized as possible. And so like if you're getting high breath readings, we'll give you some assistance to, on kind of what that could relate to. If your levels are lower, we'll give you some assistance there too. and trying to understand, like you say, the holistic aspect of it too, because there's just a whole ecosystem in the gut, and it can manifest itself in so many different ways. And the two-way relationships are crazy, where like, if your gut is not doing so great, your sleep will be affected, but then vice versa. I mean, it's the same for stress, certainly. But yeah, so the app is kind of your guide, and we're actually, we're updating that all the time. And so we've got more coming down the road, and that's all free. Like, if you buy the device, the updates are all free as well.
So in kind of, while we're speaking about updates and things that you guys are working on, what does the future look like for digital health when it comes to FoodMarble? Yeah.
So like, we're like this year and last year, we're doing a lot more with doctors and gastroenterologists and researchers, because we've got this big data set, and it's like, we've been collaborating with academics to be able to look into the data set in a purely anonymized way. So we're looking at the very high level, like, what can we learn from this, and how can we apply that, that knowledge to help people going through the process, so we can give you more insights. So we're seeing where, like, every year you're seeing where this sort of information is relevant, and more and more conditions have been tied back to the gut. So it's really interesting stuff coming down the line, where, like, for example, you're seeing a lot with skin disorders. So like a really clear one is with rosacea. So a lot of people who, that's kind of where you get this sort of reddening of the face, and it's a pretty common issue, but it's very often, like, it's over half of cases of people with rosacea have SIBO. And actually, when the SIBO gets resolved, almost to a person, the rosacea resolves too. So you're seeing where, like, it's directly tying back to a condition, and it does relate to other skin conditions, but like, the data is still pretty new. So like, we're just trying to figure this stuff out. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's a ton of different conditions where it could be related. Like, what's really interesting as well is where you're looking at things where it can be a condition relating to the brain, or, to your neurological system. Like, for example, you're seeing with Parkinson's disease, where, like, it's interesting, the kind of motor symptoms and the kind of movement, kind of related symptoms that are kind of, commonly associated with Parkinson's. It's interesting that before those happen, typically people are seeing digestive symptoms. So they might be, for example, becoming very constipated, or in a lot of cases, actually, they have SIBO. So that's an interesting thing that's just emerged very recently. But like, so we're tying some of these diseases that don't seem related to the gut at all, but they're being tied back to the gut. And so, there's so much more research to do to figure out exactly what the links are. But we're doing a lot of that stuff today, because ultimately, like, if we can have a device that can be somebody's lifetime companion and kind of help them along their life journey, because like, almost everyone they're gonna experience different types of health problems over time. And so we just want to be there for people who have the device, and whether they're doing it on their own, or they're working with a gastroenterologist or a doctor, we want to be able to just provide the insight to you and your clinician, and just kind of, help you along the way.
Absolutely. And there's a reason why gut health is such a prominent trend right now. And, documentaries are coming out, books are coming out, social media, it's taken over about what is your gut health and microbiome. And I would say that is partly due to so many individuals struggling with digestive health. And to your point, mind and mood health, whether that looks like depression, anxiety, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. We do a lot of work, LifeSeasons, kind of with, we partner with a doctor who he's dedicated his whole life to reversing cognitive decline, and how the connection between, constipation there's a big correlation with that. And so it makes sense this stuff is emerging because so many people struggle with these issues. So I love that the dots are starting to connect, the information or the data has been collected. And so now it's just a matter of, okay, what do we do with that data? And it sounds like you guys are already kind of laying that out and making these connections. Rosacea, I think psoriasis and eczema, I think I'd have to say most, not that I'm a doctor, but most skin conditions are usually what's going on internal. And I would assume a lot of them are gut related issues like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll definitely see more and more of that. So what we want to do is be able to gather the data and to see, okay, well, what sort of if it's happening in the gut, what metrics are we seeing? What can we measure as biomarkers to help people kind of go from where they are having these issues to where they can be relieved and where they can be relieved long term as well.
Absolutely. Well, incredible. Well, this has been such a valuable conversation. Before we kind of round things out, I want to mention you guys are offering a discount code. So 15% off for our listeners, and the code is FORLIFE15. So FORLIFE15 to be able to get this device in your hands, and not just like a weekly one-time kind of thing. This is your partner for life. If you struggle with digestive issues, to be able to have this tool to assess where you are in the spectrum. Is it more hydrogen? Is it methane? Is it a combination? And how you can practically approach your diet and lifestyle with your own personalized information. I mean, I don't think there's any greater gift. So again, for Life 15, Aonghus, was there anything that I missed? Anything regarding the device or just the work that you're doing that you'd love to share with listeners?
No, I think you've done a great job, Niki. It's us and the rest of the world, we're still at a relatively early stage in terms of understanding how the microbiome and how the gut and how that relates to your overall health, how all those things link together. It's an exciting time though, because we are capturing some of this data and we're making these links, and it's only as we get more data and make those connections that we can make progress. So yeah, just delighted to get more people on board and to see where we can help people. And and if any of your listeners have feedback for us, we're always very open to that. And it's an evolving system. So great to be able to be involved, and nice conversation.
Absolutely. I think this was incredibly fruitful, and I'm just excited to hear more and see the science behind it. So thank you again for being here. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Niki.
All right. Take care.